After the initial devastating attack launched by the Quincy's at the start of the final arc of Bleach, the Captain Commander Kyoraku Shunsui takes it upon himself to help their best warrior Kenpachi Zaraki finally learn the art of the sword, and this essentially just means helping him finally learn to speak to his Zanpakuto, hopefully hear its name, and learn Shikai. Now, Kyoraku has only one person in mind to help Kenpachi learn this power: Captain UNOHANA. Now, this was a huge mind-bending twist back in the day. Captain Retsu UNOHANA, the kindly healer of the 4th Division, well, she was actually Yachiru UNOHANA, the very first Kenpachi, the first captain of the 11th Division, and a blood-crazed criminal that helped Yamamoto build the Gotei 13 1,000 years ago as a band of merciless thugs. Unohana decides to train Kenpachi by fighting him in a rigorous battle to the death, where she murders him over and over again, resuscitating him at the point of death to help him continue to grow stronger and finally speak to his Zanpakuto. Now, this is genuinely one of my favourite Kenpachi fights in the entire series. I think there's so much to this battle and there's so much behind it as well. But during this fight, in chapter 526, Kenpachi thinks he's actually finished off Unohana with a strike to the chest. She surprises him, however, by activating her Bankai, Minazuki. Now, a new Bankai is always an incredibly exciting affair. However, what followed here was weird, abstract, and completely unexplained, meaning that fans went without any kind of concrete explanation as to what Unohana's Bankai actually did. So in this video, we're going to take a look at that brief moment in the fight between Kenpachis when Unohana uses her Bankai and try and decipher maybe what's going on here, what Kubo was aiming for, look at some of the theories fans have about her Bankai, and see if we can come up with something that satisfies us regarding an explanation. Before we begin, however, guys, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure to hit that button now. I really appreciate the support. Keep pushing us towards 30,000 subs. We put Bleach videos out like this every single week, so if you are a fan of Bleach, you are in absolutely the right place. Give the video a thumbs up as well. It really helps with the exposure on YouTube, so more people can come and see the video. I'd really appreciate the support. Don't forget to hit the notification bell as well, guys, so that you never miss one of my videos when they arrive in your sub box. Become a part of the wider community as well by following me over on Twitter, and don't forget to join us on Discord, the link to which you'll find in the description below. So, Unohana finally reveals her true nature, and this is a really great twist, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this fight in super in-depth detail when we get to that point in the future. But for now, we're looking at Unohana's Bankai specifically when she activates it, and we're going to try and work out what we think this thing can actually do. So in chapter 526, the chapter opens with Kenpachi pulling his sword out of Unohana, having sliced her across the chest at the end of the previous chapter, and he thinks she's dead. However, she reveals herself to have survived the attack. She then strikes back at Kenpachi, and the two of them push apart. It's at this point that Unohana activates her Bankai, Minazuki. Now, you might remember that her Shikai is also called Minazuki. This is the first and only time in the series we see the Bankai and the Shikai have the exact same name, except they're not quite the same, because they actually mean two very different things, and in this state the Bankai actually means all things end. Now, I think it's really cool that Kubo was able to do this. From an artistic standpoint, it's just really creative, and the fact that the Bankai and the Shikai reflect the two very different sides of Unohana herself, I absolutely love that. The Shikai is the kind, healing manta ray thing that heals people inside its stomach with its stomach acids, whereas her Bankai, well, we don't really know what it is, but we know that it's very dangerous. It's definitely representative of her bloodthirsty side, and I just think it's really creative of Kubo that he was able to do that with her. Now, about the Bankai itself, when she activates it, her blade seems to disappear. It actually turns into a stringy, gloop-like substance, and it's obviously a little bit difficult to gauge what that is in a black and white manga, but we do see her on the cover page of the next chapter as well, and it is bright red, which led me and many others to think the blade had become almost like a whip made of blood. Now, I think thematically this would be really cool and make an awful lot of sense. We know that Unohana used to be a blood-crazed murderer, and she took on the name Yachiru because she had mastered so many styles of the sword. So to me at least, it would make an awful lot of sense for her Bankai to take on the blood of all the victims she's accrued over the years, and in some ways that actually gives her some kind of similarity to Yamamoto, these two ancient captains who used to be leaders of the horrible Gotei 13, this vicious band of killers, both of their bankais reflect the crimes they've committed in the past. Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi allows him to resurrect the burnt-out ashes of the dead that he has killed with Ryujin Jaka. I think that is really, really awesome. And so it kind of makes sense to me that Unohana, who's essentially his right-hand man back in the day, has a similar bankai that reminds her and the people she fights of the crimes she's committed in the past. Her sword becomes a flowing whip of blood, a river of blood, because of all the people she has killed. However, the fight continues and she doesn't explain her bankai at all. She transforms it. You see it kind of like dripping off of her sword hilt. It does look really, really cool, to be fair. And she basically tells Kenpachi that it's time to draw the curtain on their fight. Now, it makes sense that she wouldn't just stop and start explaining her bankai, because these two guys are killers, they are battle lovers, and it would just make sense they'd carry on with the fight and they're not stopping for anything. But it does mean, as fans, we don't really get to find out what this thing does. Now, what confuses matters even further is what happens next in the fight, and things get really weird. As Kenpachi clashes blades with Unohana, they both turn into skeletons. Now, this is really, really odd. You basically watch their flesh melt away from their skin. Kenpachi can see it himself. He says that he's melting away. He can see himself becoming a skeleton. And Unohana has also become a skeleton, so that's kind of weird as well. Many people have theorized over the years as to whether this becoming the skeletons is physical or it's only figurative. It's not actually happening. And I think there's an argument for both here. And I think both of these arguments possibly relate to her bankai. So, if we want to take it as this is physically happening to them, they are actually both dissolving into skeletons, then I think it's possible that what's coming off of Unohana's blade is not blood, but acid. And I think there are some things that actually support this claim a little bit. When Unohana activates her bankai and her sword turns into this substance, we see it bubbling and almost hissing when it comes out of her blade. There's definitely a sound effect on there that would imply at the very least that there is a sort of gloopy, hissing noise coming off this thing as she activates its power. That to me would indicate that it is some kind of acid. And also remember that a bankai will, at least in some way, reflect the Shikai. And we know that Minazuki's Shikai actually heals people with its stomach acid. So, honestly, for me, the fact that its Shikai uses acid is probably the biggest piece of evidence for this being acid as well. The Shikai heals people with acid, the bankai strips them to the bone with acid. Again, very indicative of the two sides of Unohana, and I could absolutely see this being the case. I do find it a little bit hard to believe that they would be able to be reduced to such skeletal forms and still survive, even with Unohana's incredible healing prowess. And there's also the fact that she becomes a skeleton as well. Does that mean that her bankai affects her? We do see her swinging it around like a bit of a, without a care in the world, so I'm assuming that acid, if that's what it is going everywhere. So if it does affect her as well, that does seem a little bit detrimental to me, but she apparently has the healing abilities to restore herself completely anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. If that is what her bankai does, that seems to be pretty powerful. You would assume that Kenpachi is only surviving turning into a skeleton because it's what Unohana wants. You imagine that if she actually activated her bankai against someone she didn't care about fighting, they would probably be reduced to dust. So that's one avenue for Unohana's bankai Minazuki. It could actually be literal acid coming out of her sword. Her blade turns into acid that she's able to manipulate, essentially. It almost becomes like a whip. And that is actually burning away Kenpachi's flesh. But there is another option, I think, which is slightly more abstract and not quite as literal. Now, we know that both Kenpachi and Unohana absolutely love and crave battle. Both of them love fighting to the degree that they want the fight to be as interesting as possible. They want to drag out the fight if they possibly can and make it as interesting for themselves as they possibly can. So, is it possible then that Unohana's bankai is not actually turning them into skeletons, but it is more a figurative representation of their instincts, their battle-loving instincts, as both of them turn into skeletons to do battle? It's possible then that this section of the battle that showcases them as skeletons is not literally happening to them, but is a figurative representation of them both being stripped back to their absolute base instincts, their battle-loving selves, showcased as murderous skeletons wielding blades. I could absolutely see that. I also wonder, though, if it is maybe an ability of Unohana's Zanpakuto that is slightly more figurative. one that brings out the base instincts of those she's fighting. So for example, here she's fighting Kenpachi, so the Bankai reveals his base instinct, which is to love fighting, which is to be a fighter, and perhaps it makes him even a bit stronger. That would, in my eyes at least, be in line with Unohana's desire to make fights as interesting as possible. However, if she were fighting a coward at heart, her Bankai would reveal them to be, a real coward, and they, become completely useless in a battle. I could see that as well. Personally, however, my genuine opinion as to Unohana's Bankai, I think the acid is actually quite likely, just because of the relationship to her Shikai. However, I wouldn't put it past Kubo for the whole disintegrating into skeletons thing to just be a figurative representation of them both being stripped back to their absolute base instincts, to the monsters that they are at heart that absolutely love fighting. I could definitely see that being the case with Unohana's Bankai. Safe to say, either way, we really don't have an awful lot to go on. Whether you actually think that her Bankai is a stream of acid that burns away the opponent, or a stream of blood that's indicative of her victims, or maybe something considerably more abstract, to do with their instinct and stripping them back to who they really are and revealing who they are on the surface. It's impossible to say for sure, because we won't know unless Kubo actually reveals it. But let me know, guys, in the comments below what you think Unohana's Bankai could actually be. Do you think it's one of the suggestions I've laid out for you here today? If you want a concrete answer from me, what I actually think Unohana's Bankai is, I'm going to go with the acid, and I'm assuming she's probably healing them at an incredibly fast rate, just because of the sound effects and the way it looks when she activates her Bankai, and the fact that it does have such a relationship to the Shikai. Despite them being two halves, they are two halves of the same coin at the end of the day, and I think them both using acid makes a lot of sense. But then I also think that it being a figurative representation of their instinct makes a lot of sense, so really, what do I know? But that's it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my ramblings about Unohana's Bankai, Minazuki, probably the most mysterious Bankai in the series. Definitely the only time, I think, we ever got to see a Bankai in action and never actually find out what it does. I mean, I guess Ichigo's Final Tenses Zangetsu is similar, but I assume that's more raw power output. Unohana's Bankai actually transforms into something that we have no idea what it does. The fact that it's followed up with the abstract section with the skeletons definitely doesn't help. But that's it from me this time, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button if you did. Help the exposure. Don't forget to subscribe to me if you haven't already. And I shall see you next time. See you then.